A U.S. Air Force U-2 spy plane, piloted by Major Rudolf Anderson Jr., takes off from McCoy Air Force Base in Orlando, Florida, and begins its climb to a cruise altitude of 72,000 feet. It's the 27th of October, 1962, the 13th day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the world stands on the brink of nuclear war. 13 days earlier, a U-2 reconnaissance mission captured photographic evidence of Soviet medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the American mainland. The discovery triggered one of the most dangerous confrontations of the Cold War. President Kennedy ordered a naval blockade of Cuba and demanded the removal of the missiles. The Soviet Union, under Premier Nikita Khrushchev, insisted the weapons were defensive. Behind the scenes, both sides prepared for the possibility of all-out nuclear conflict. Anderson's mission, designated Mission 3127, is his sixth reconnaissance flight over Cuba as part of Operation Brass Knob. This 35-year-old veteran, who earned 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses flying RF-86 Sabres in Korea, wasn't originally scheduled for today's flight. He lobbied hard for the assignment. The mission is particularly dangerous. Soviet SA-2 surface-to-air missiles are now operational across the island, with a maximum altitude of 82,000 feet, more than capable of reaching his aircraft. At 9:20, Anderson flies over the Soviet Air Defense Division headquarters in Camagüey. He continues south to Manzanillo, then turns east towards Santiago de Cuba, passing over Guantanamo Naval Base. His cameras click continuously, capturing fresh images of Soviet missile installations. He maintains radio silence despite Soviet radio operators repeatedly asking him to identify himself. On the ground at the command post of the 27th Anti-Aircraft Division in Camagüey, regimental commanders are demanding permission to engage the intruder. The positions they built with such effort are being photographed in broad daylight. What neither the Soviets in Cuba nor the Americans in Washington know is that Moscow has explicitly ordered its forces not to fire on American reconnaissance aircraft. Khrushchev wants to avoid any action that could trigger a catastrophic escalation. But the local Soviet commanders, fearing the U-2 has discovered the forward deployment positions of nuclear cruise missiles just 15 miles from Guantanamo, make a fateful decision. Without authorization from Moscow, they order the SA-2 battery near Baines to fire. A salvo of 2 SA-2 guideline missiles streak into the sky. One explodes near Anderson's U-2. Shrapnel from the blast pierces the cockpit, along with Anderson's pressurized flight suit and helmet. The Major is likely killed instantly. The U-2 breaks apart and plummets 72,000 feet to the tropical island below. Within hours, word of the shootdown reaches the White House cabinet room. The news arrives amid mounting tension. Another U-2 had accidentally strayed over Soviet airspace earlier that day, sending Soviet MiG fighters scrambling in pursuit. Kennedy's military advisors are convinced the Soviets have just fired the first shot. Assistant Secretary of Defense Paul Nitze declares, "They fired the first shot." President Kennedy remarks, "We are now in an entirely new ballgame." The military leadership overwhelmingly urges Kennedy to launch immediate airstrikes against Cuba's air defenses. The Joint Chiefs of Staff remind him of earlier assurances that if a SAM site shot at American aircraft, retaliation would be swift. But Kennedy correctly suspects that Khrushchev did not authorize the attack. He understands that military retaliation could spiral into uncontrollable escalation. In Moscow, Khrushchev is equally alarmed. He realizes his orders restraining the use of force are meaningless if local commanders won't obey them. Both leaders suddenly understand the crisis is slipping out of their control. As Kennedy tells his advisors, "It isn't the first step that concerns me, but both sides escalating to the 4th or 5th step, and we don't go to the 6th because there is no one around to do so." That night, Kennedy dispatches his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, to meet secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. He offers a deal to end the standoff peacefully. The Soviets will remove their nuclear missiles from Cuba. In exchange, the United States pledges not to invade Cuba and agrees to quietly withdraw American intermediate-range nuclear missiles from Turkey. Khrushchev accepts. the most dangerous moments of the Cuban Missile Crisis come to an end. Major Rudolf Anderson becomes the only combat casualty in a confrontation that could have killed millions. When Kennedy learns that Anderson had a wife and 2 sons, ages 5 and 3, with another child on the way, the loss strikes home. He had a boy about the same age as John, he tells his advisors. The president writes to Anderson's widow, "Your husband's mission was of the greatest importance, but I know how deeply you must feel his loss." Anderson is later awarded the first ever Air Force Cross, the service's second highest honor. The success of the SA-2 missile over Cuba reinforces what the Powers incident 2 years earlier had demonstrated. High-altitude strategic bombers are no longer safe from Soviet air defenses. Both the US Air Force and Royal Air Force shift their nuclear strike plans toward low-altitude attack profiles. Wreckage from Anderson's U-2 remains on display in 3 Cuban museums today, but in his hometown of Greenville, South Carolina, where he built model airplanes as a boy and chose, "Good humor is the clear blue sky of the soul," as his high school yearbook quote, he is remembered at a memorial redesigned on the 50th anniversary of his death. The memorial features 13 granite slabs, one for each day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and an F-86 Sabre jet, like the ones he flew in Korea, honoring the pilot whose death may have saved millions.